Aking grew up in Kizii, in a small home filled with love, laughter, and the sound of her mother's sewing machine. Her mother was a tailor, known in the village for her beautiful work, but they didn't have much. Money was tight. Dreams were expensive. Still, Aking dreamed big. Every scrap of fabric her mother left behind became a doll dress, a patchwork design, or a new idea. She believed that one day, her name would be known in fashion, no matter how impossible it seemed. Through hard work and endless nights of sewing and sketching, Aking earned a scholarship to a top fashion school in Nairobi. There she stood out, not just for her raw talent, but for the way she brought life and soul into her designs. Her classmates came from rich families. She came with a suitcase full of handmade clothes and a heart full of fire. That's where she met Kwame. He was confident, kind, and from a powerful, wealthy family. They connected instantly, two very different worlds, but something clicked. They would sit for hours talking about dreams, love, and the kind of life they wanted to build. Aking fell in love with him slowly, deeply, and Kwame loved her too. But behind the smiles and kisses, a storm was building. When Kwame introduced her to his family, everything changed. Whispers started. Looks were exchanged. They called her the tailor's daughter, like it was something dirty. Aking could feel the judgment in their eyes, and it hurt more than she expected. Aking had been nervous all week. She was finally going to meet Kwame's family, his mother, the one everyone called Madame Beatrice. She wanted to make a good impression, so she did what she knew best. She designed and stitched a beautiful dress from African fabric, pouring her heart into every detail. It wasn't from a fancy store, but it was hers, made with love, strength, and pride. When she stepped into the big family home in Nairobi, her heart was beating fast. Everything felt grand. Glass chandeliers, expensive art, waiters serving drinks. Aking smiled, trying to stay calm. She held Kwame's hand tightly as he led her toward his mother, who stood tall in a shimmering gown, diamonds on her ears and neck. Beatrice looked at her from head to toe. There was a silence. Then came the smile, but it wasn't kind. It was sharp, cold. "Oh," Beatrice said, loud enough for everyone around to hear. "This is the one you've been talking about? The tailor's daughter?" People turned to look. Some smiled awkwardly. Aking's cheeks burned. She wanted to shrink into the floor, but she stood tall. "Yes, ma'am," she said softly. "I'm Azink." Beatrice gave a short laugh. "Well, I can see that. Your dress makes it clear. Homemade, isn't it? Quite creative." Her voice dripped with fake sweetness, but the message was clear. "You don't belong here." Aking looked at Kwame, silently begging for support. But he didn't say a word. He just stood there, frozen, his eyes on the ground. Aking's heart broke a little in that moment. Not just from Beatrice's words, but from Kwame's silence. She smiled politely, nodded, and walked away to find some air. She could feel eyes following her, whispers growing behind her back. She had faced hard days before, but this one felt different. This was not just rejection. It was shame, handed to her on a silver plate in front of strangers, and the man she loved didn't defend her. Outside, she took a deep breath. The city lights blinked in the distance. Aking couldn't sleep that night. Beatrice's words played over and over in her mind like a cruel song she couldn't turn off. The laughter, the whispers, the silence from Kwame, it all cut deep. She had never felt so small. For days, she stayed quiet, barely touching her food. Her heart was heavy. Was she really not good enough? Was all her hard work still not enough to deserve love and respect? She looked at the dress she had made, the one Beatrice mocked. It was still beautiful, but now, it felt like a symbol of her shame. Every stitch reminded her of that painful night. Aking started to question everything. Maybe she had dreamed too big. Maybe a girl from Kizii was never meant to fit into a world of glass houses and diamond necklaces. Her friends noticed the change. They came over, sat with her, and reminded her who she was. "You've come too far to let one person define you," one friend said. "You don't need their approval." Another one added, "If he won't fight for you, he doesn't deserve you." Their words were kind, but Aking's heart still felt broken. Not just from what happened, but from the silence of the man who claimed to love her. But something inside her refused to stay down. She remembered her mother's hands, strong, steady, always sewing even when there was no money. She remembered how she used to dream with nothing but scraps of fabric and big hope. That fire hadn't died. It was still there, even under all the pain. So, one morning, Aking packed her bags. Not to return to Kwame, not to prove herself to his mother, but to build something for herself. She went back to Nairobi with a new mission, not love, not approval, but purpose. She walked into the same city that once made her feel small, but this time with her head held high. No more waiting for a seat at someone else's table. She would build her own table, and she would make it beautiful. Back in Nairobi, Aking poured all her pain, anger, and hope into her work. She stopped waiting for love, approval, or applause. Instead, she picked up her fabric, needle, and thread and got to work. She turned her small apartment into a workshop. Day and night, she stitched. She mixed old clothes with bold African prints, creating something new, something powerful. She called her brand Guvu, which means strength, because that's what she had left. And that's what she wanted every woman to feel when they wore her designs. At first, it was slow, just a few followers online, a few friends reposting her work. But then, one day, everything changed. A local influencer wore one of Aking's dresses and posted a photo on Instagram. It went viral. People were asking, "Who made this?" Orders started rolling in, first from Nairobi, then from Lagos, Accra, Johannesburg. Suddenly, Aking's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Celebrities were reaching out. Fashion blogs were calling her the next big thing. Her designs weren't just clothes. They told a story out of roots, out of strength, out of survival. Aking didn't have a big team. She still worked from her tiny apartment. But the passion was bigger than any fancy studio. Every piece she made carried a little piece of her past and a whole lot of her future. She didn't need validation anymore. The world was finally seeing her, and this time on her terms. But not everyone was clapping. One day, someone forwarded her a voice note that it was Mama Beatrice, laughing. She calls herself a designer now, using old clothes? Please that's not fashion, it's a joke. The words stung, but they didn't shake her. Not this time. Aking smiled, took a deep breath, and kept stitching. She knew her journey wasn't to impress anyone. It was to inspire, and it was working. She hung a small sign above her sewing machine that read, "From rejected to respected." Every time she felt doubt, she looked at it, because deep down, she knew she wasn't just building a brand, she was rewriting her story. Kwame watched Aking's rise from afar, and every time he saw her name trending or her designs on a magazine cover, his heart swelled with pride and guilt. He remembered the night his mother humiliated her. He remembered standing there, saying nothing. That silence haunted him. But now, the world was cheering for the same woman his mother once mocked. And he was still stuck in the middle, torn between the woman he loved and the mother who raised him. Mama Beatrice was furious. "If you marry that girl, you're no longer my son," she snapped one day, her voice sharp with anger. "We build a name, a reputation. She will ruin it." She made it clear. Choosing Aking meant losing everything. His family, his inheritance, the life he grew up with. But the more Kwame saw Aking shine, the harder it became to accept his mother's harshness. Aking wasn't just successful, she was powerful. She had taken pain and turned it into art. She had faced shame and turned it into strength. And she had done it all alone, without him. He started pulling away from Beatrice. He stopped attending her events, answering her long calls, or entertaining her gossip. He needed space to think. For the first time in his life, he questioned everything she taught him about status and respectable families. Because if those values meant turning your back on someone like Aking, maybe they weren't worth holding on to. Deep down, he still loved his mother. But he also knew love couldn't be used as a weapon. Watching Aking rise without bitterness, without revenge, just grace and fire, made him admire her more than ever. She didn't beg. She didn't fight for a place at the table. She built her own. And now, she was feeding the world with her vision. Kwame realized something simple but powerful. Aking didn't need him, but he needed her. Not to fix him, not to save him, but to remind him of the kind of man he wanted to be. And he was done hiding. It was time to choose. And this time, he wouldn't stay silent. The wedding date was finally set. Aking and Kwame were ready to begin a new chapter, one built on love, not approval. Aking designed their wedding invites herself, blending soft ivory paper with bold ochre patterns. Each one was carefully crafted, with their story woven into every detail. IT wasn't just a wedding. It was a celebration of everything they had fought through. Kwame delivered the invitation to his mother personally. He still hoped, just maybe, she would show up, smile, accept the woman he loved. But Mama Beatrice didn't even open it in front of him. She placed it on the table like it was nothing. A few days later, Aking received the response that IT came in a plain envelope. No note, no words. Just the invite, ripped cleanly in half. Left and right, her name and Kwame's torn apart, like it meant nothing. The pain hit hard, not just for her, but for what it symbolized. Rejection, again. This time, louder, sharper, and worse, it didn't stay private. Someone took a photo of the torn invite and sent out on WhatsApp. Within hours, it was everywhere. People were talking. Screenshots flew through family groups, gossip chats, online forums. Some people laughed, some defended Aking. Others said she should have known better. But Aking? She stayed quiet. She didn't post a thing. She didn't clap back. She didn't cry online. Instead, she buried herself in work. Her brand Gavu was booming. New clients, bigger orders, even a fashion show in Ghana. She knew what the old version of herself would have done. Maybe beg, maybe break. But that girl was gone. She had learned that silence could be power, that sometimes the loudest answer is no reaction at all. While others talked about drama, she talked about fabrics. While they shared gossip, she shared progress. And deep down, she knew this was not just about a wedding. This was about who she was becoming. And she wasn't going to let a torn invite tear her down. She hung the pieces of the ripped card in her studio, not out of pain, but as a reminder. The air at the dinner table was tense from the start. It was supposed to be a family gathering, but Aking could feel it. This wasn't just dinner. It was a setup. Mama Beatrice sat at the head of the table, dressed in gold, her chin high, her smile tight. The moment Aking and Kwame walked in, the room went quiet. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something. They ate in silence for a while. Then, Beatrice cleared her throat and looked directly at Kwame. "I've been patient," she said, her voice cold but calm. "But this nonsense has gone too far." Kwame's fork paused midair. "You're Mboya," she continued. "You don't marry a girl who sells clothes on Instagram. You marry someone respectable, someone with a name, a future." Aking kept her eyes on her plate, her heart pounding. Beatrice leaned forward. "There's a lovely young woman, daughter of a minister. Educated, comes from a real family. That's who you'll marry." Silence fell over the table like a thick fog. Aking quietly placed her napkin on the table, trying to hold back tears. She stood up slowly, her chair scraping the floor. She didn't yell. She didn't plead. She just turned to leave, heart heavy, but head high. That's when Kwame stood too. "No," he said, voice shaking with anger but steady. Beatrice looked up sharply. "Excuse me." Kwame took a deep breath. "If Aking isn't good enough for this family, then I'm no longer part of it." The table froze. "I won't marry anyone else. I won't play by your rules. You raised me to be strong, but now you're asking me to be weak. I won't do it." Beatrice's face went pale. Guests gasped. Some whispered. But Kwame didn't care anymore. He walked over to Aking, gently took her hand, and said, "Let's go." In that moment, Aking didn't need applause. She didn't need revenge. She had love. Real, loud, unapologetic love. The kind that stands up and says enough. And as they walked out together, hand in hand, Aking knew she didn't lose a family that night. The night after the family dinner, everything changed, and not just for Aking and Kwame. Someone at the table had secretly recorded Kwame's outburst, and by morning, the video was everywhere. It started with a tweet. "This man just disowned his own privilege for love. Listen to what real backbone sounds like." Attached was the clip, Kwame's voice, clear and steady, saying, "If Aking isn't good enough for you, then neither am I." Within hours, the video had gone viral. Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, WhatsApp, everyone was talking. Some called it the boldest love declaration they'd ever seen. Others shared their own stories of being judged for where they came from. The internet crowned Kwame a hero, a real man who chose love over legacy. But not everyone was applauding. Mama Beatrice's name started trending too, but not for the right reasons. People dragged her in the comments, calling her out for classism, arrogance, and cruelty. Screenshots of her past quotes surfaced. Memes exploded. Point one read: "You try to break a queen and ended up breaking your reputation." Beatrice had always been respected in high society, known for her wealth and sharp tongue. But now, that sharp tongue had turned against her. Even people from her own social circles began to distance themselves. Some of her charity board members stepped down. Her name was no longer tied to elegance, but entitlement. Meanwhile, Aking stayed quiet. She didn't post, didn't respond. Instead, she focused on work, replying to orders, designing her next collection, and handling calls from international clients. She had nothing to prove. The world was already watching, and for once, it was watching with admiration. Kwame showed up at her studio later that day with lunch in his hands and softness in his eyes. "I didn't expect it to blow up like this," he said quietly, "but I meant every word." Aking looked at him, her heart full. "That I know," she said. They didn't need the world's applause to know their love was real, but it didn't hurry to finally be seen. Beatrice had never known silence like this. Her phone barely rang anymore. Friends stopped visiting. Her social circles, once full of praise and admiration, now whispered behind her back. Headlines had moved on, but the damage remained. She had become the face of pride and prejudice, a symbol of everything the younger generation was pushing against. And it broke her. Behind the walls of her big house, Beatrice crumbled. She barely got out of bed. She stared at the mirror, not recognizing the woman in it. The videos, the comments, the cruel jokes that it all played over in her head like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She had tried to protect her son's name, but ended up losing his love and the world's respect. So when the doorbell rang one quiet afternoon, she didn't expect to see Aking standing there. Aking was dressed simply, no cameras, no press, just her holding a small bag of homemade food. Beatrice froze. For a moment, she couldn't speak. "I heard you haven't been eating much," Aking said softly. "That I brought something." Beatrice stepped aside slowly, unsure what this was. Not a trap, a show? But Aking didn't act like someone holding a grudge. She moved gently, placing the food on the kitchen counter as if she had done it 100 times. "I didn't come to fight," Aking said. "I came because I see you, and I know what it feels like to be judged." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. She turned away, ashamed, vulnerable for the first time. "I tried to break you," she whispered, "and you still came." Aking nodded. Then she smiled, not with pride, but with peace. "You raised a strong man," she said. "And somehow, through all of this, you helped me become a stronger woman too." Beatrice broke down. For the first time in years, she let herself cry, really cry. Not from anger, but from regret. And Aking, the girl she once looked down on, stood by her side, not with revenge, but with quiet grace. It wasn't forgiveness in full. Not yet. But it was a start at a moment of healing. The wedding was nothing short of magical. Bright African prints, soft white roses, music that made hearts swell. It was a day that felt like a dream. But what truly stole the world's heart wasn't just the beauty of the event. It was the moment everyone thought would never happen. Mama Beatrice, in a deep purple gown, holding Aking's hand and walking her down the aisle. Phones went up. Cameras flashed. That single moment went viral in minutes. People all over the world watched in shock, in joy, in tears. The woman who once tore Aking apart was now leading her into a new chapter, with quiet dignity and a shaky smile. It wasn't about perfection. It was about growth, change, and love that had taken the long, hard road. As Aking walked toward Kwame, her heart was steady. No fear, no doubt. She had already won. Not just love, but respect. Not just success, but peace. By then, Nguvu had grown into a global brand. Her designs were being worn in New York, Paris, Lagos, and Tokyo. Celebrities called her by name. Her pieces told stories of strength, of roots, of rising through pain with beauty. A few months later, a documentary aired around the world. The title was simple but powerful, The Woman Not Good Enough. It followed her journey from a small house in Kizii to global runways, from shame to spotlight, from rejection to redemption. And in one quiet scene, Aking said, "Maybe I wasn't good enough for them, but I became more than enough for myself." That day, and every day after, proved one thing. No one gets to define your worth except you.